Rice said that the remedy for bad speech is not censorship. It's never censorship. It's more speech. They wrote the First Amendment not to protect the kind of speech that everybody wants to hear that doesn't offend anybody. They wrote it to protect the kind of speech that offends people and we don't want to hear. In America, our whole system of government, which is rooted in the First Amendment, is based on this confidence. And when ideas are allowed to triumph in the marketplace of debate, and we will have a better country, we will have more freedom, and we will have a better government in the long run. And this week, Hillary Clinton, Tim Walz, and Kamala Harris all said the same thing. They said that if the Democrats get back into office, that they are going to make sure that misinformation and disinformation is censored. They said that the First Amendment, they were specifically talking about Elon Musk, and they said that they were going to teach him that the First Amendment is a privilege, not a right. Do you consider the First Amendment to be a privilege? Do you consider it to be your right? Your God-given right? Do you want to elect government officials who are going to take that right away from you? Who was the biggest perpetrator? We now know, and everybody admits. Who was the biggest perpetrator of misinformation during the pandemic? Did you say Anthony Fauci? No, it was the government of the United States. So we don't want to give the government power to censor other people's misinformation while it perpetrates its own, do we? You look at that pandemic, you look at the management of the disaster. The Brown University, they closed all the schools. The Brown University study said our children, our toddlers in this country lost 22 IQ points. A third of children are now going to be taking remedial education, and many believe they will never recover. The GMAT scores are down. All of the scoring of IQ and our children's intelligence are down. This did a terrible, terrible blow to our country. And what was the point of it all? Well, we look at what the outcome was. And the outcome was that they shifted. They closed all of the small business in this country. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. They shifted money upward. They strengthened these big tech institutions like Amazon and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and Google. And they weakened Main Street and small business and the American worker, and they shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires, which is the biggest outcome, the biggest shift in world history of wealth. And they shifted power. We gave our government all these new powers. And I want you all to remember three things, three rules. One is that when you give a government a power, it will never voluntarily relinquish it. Second rule, that if you give a government a power, it will ultimately abuse that power to the maximum extent possible. And the third rule is that nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarianism. So what are we going to do if they try it again? Resist, resist, resist. What are we going to do? Resist, resist, resist. And we enriched all of these corporations. and their captive agencies, and now want to go and commoditize all of the things we value in our lives. They're commoditized the Constitution. They have turned the courts into servants for authority instead of the servants of the people. They've commoditized the press and turned the press away from the First Amendment and into propagandists. They're commoditizing our landscapes. They're commoditizing our health, and they're commoditizing our children. And the biggest beneficiary of the pandemic was, of course, the pharmaceutical cartel. And if you're part of Big Pharma, the most valuable asset in this country today is a sick child. And so they want to keep you, they don't want to kill our children. They just want to keep them sick and dependent on chronic disease drugs for the rest of our lives. And they now have so much power over this, the exemplary democracy of the world, that they have been able to make us the sickest country in the world. We have the sickest children in the world. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, that number is around 60%. When my uncle was president, I was a 10-year-old boy. We had 3.4% of Americans were obese. Today, 74% of Americans are obese or overweight. Japan, 3% of the people are obese, the same as we were in 1960. We have explosions. Autism has gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in every 34. 1 in 10,000 in my generation, 1 in every 34 in my kids' generation. Juvenile diabetes, which when I was a kid, the average pediatrician saw 1 case over a 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 children who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Our fertility levels are plummeting. Teens today have 50% of the testosterone and 50% of the sperm count that they did 2 generations ago. American girls are hitting puberty at 8 years old. The average is between 10 and 13, which is 6 years younger than it was 2 generations ago. We have the lowest puberty rates among girls in the whole world in this country. We have lost, since 1970, when we were leading the world in longevity, we've lost 6 years compared to Europe. In Japan, in Italy, we spend 4 times per capita what Italians pay for healthcare, and we live 7.4 years less. So we are commoditizing ourselves. We're destroying our country, including our national security. 77% of our children can no longer qualify for military service. And it's costing us $4.3 trillion a year. It is an existential threat to our country. Our country is strong and it's resilient. It's not going to be destroyed because we get the social safety net wrong or because we miscalculate about our healthcare system. It's going to happen because chronic disease is going to destroy us, and it's going to destroy us soon. If we don't win this election for a president who's going to make America healthy again, who will bring me into Washington, D.C. to reclaim our agencies from the pharmaceutical companies and from the big ag companies and the big food companies that are trying to destroy them. And you know that our food system got transformed in the early 90s. The tobacco companies were loaded with money, but they were under attack from lawsuits and from scientific revelations and government hostility that was eroding their consumer base. So they began using their excess cash to buy all the food companies in our country. By the end of the 1990s, the two biggest food companies in the world were Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds. They took all of their scientists that they were using to make tobacco more addictive, and they brought them over to the food industry to find ways to make food addictive. And they invented all these new chemicals in laboratories that were not the product of nature. And they put it in our food, and our bodies do not have the capacity to process those materials. They wouldn't let them do this in Europe. We have 1,000 ingredients in our foods because of the capture of these agencies that are illegal in Europe. So they're making the kids sick, and they're making money on it by addicting them to poisonous food. Now, I'm not even going to say food. Food-like substances. And then their partners in the pharmaceutical industry are cleaning up the profits on it. And FDA now gets 50% of its budget from pharmaceutical companies and from big food companies. And we know who runs FDA. Do you think that FDA cares about your health? Do you think CDC cares about your health? Do you think HHS cares about your health? Do you think that NIH cares about your health? Do you think the United States Department of Agriculture cares about your health? Do you think USDA cares about small farmers? There's one thing they care about: money. And we need a president who's going to come into office in this country and who is going to dismantle this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. Don't you think that you deserve a president of the United States that is going to protect our children? And don't you think that the United States deserves a president that's going to protect our freedoms, our constitutional rights, our freedom of speech, our freedom of worship, our freedom to assemble, our right to jury trials, our right to be free from unwarranted searches and seizures? And don't you want a president who's going to make America healthy again? And who's going to make America free again? And it's going to make America once again the greatest nation and the moral authority around the globe. And you need to go to the polls and get your friends there and get Donald Trump and me into Washington, D.C.